What's up, everyone? Today I'm going to do the next step on creating this Chinese corkbark elm root over rock composition. All right, well, I attached this Chinese elm to this rock a few years ago, and it's kind of interesting because I had intended the roots to actually grip it from both sides. But what has happened, if I go ahead and spin it around here, is that the root that's on the underside, because of the slant, hasn't really attached very well. But meanwhile, the tree has sort of attached itself to the stone pretty firmly because the area right here has swollen, and that's made for an interesting composition. Now, there's probably a lot of different potential fronts here, and I'm going to have to explore which front is going to be the best. Before I do that, I should mention that we're going to list some starters of Chinese corkbark elm on Bonsaify.com. If you want to pick those up, you can visit our site and do that. I'm going to set this aside. And then basically the first step is to just thin out these shoots. So anytime you cut back a Chinese elm that is vigorous, it's going to send out multiple shoots from each cut point. And in fact, they're so vigorous that they'll even bud from the cambium layer directly, not even from like an already pre-existing bud under the bark. So I have to pick which buds I want to keep, and that's the first step here that I'm going to go through. For these little guys that I don't want, I'm just going to kind of rub them off before they get going too much more. There's a pretty big cut here, and I think I'm going to make that the back of the tree so I'm not looking at that wound. That means that the front of the tree is going to be somewhere in here. Now, the way that I'm selecting the buds that I'm removing is largely about the position of each bud, or each shoot, I guess, at this point. And I don't really want to use shoots that have come out on the bottom of branches. So this is a perfect example right here. I find that the movement looks better when you take an upward pointing shoot like this one and bend it down. Of course, now I'm going to contradict myself because this one's coming from the bottom and I think I might end up keeping it. Now that I've thinned this out a little bit, you can probably see the structure a little bit better. And when I cut it back, I wasn't 100% sure which of these two pieces I wanted to use for the next section of the trunk. So this rock sort of acts like the base of the trunk, which gives it some nice shape and taper. And the fact that the tree is starting to bark down over these roots and it's really gripped the stone nicely is a definite plus, but I don't want to use both of these sections. I have to decide which one I want to use. All right, for consistency's sake, in terms of the wounds, and if you can hide all of the wounds on a deciduous piece of material in the back, you can sometimes make a little bit cleaner composition. So that makes me think that I want to take off this piece. So I've already got a wound here from a large sacrifice branch that I cut off when I potted this down from my larger growing container. And so I'm going to make a second wound here, and then I'm going to concentrate on this as being the section that I use. If you're not familiar, I am using a couple of bonsai specific tools here, one of which is this knob cutter. It's spherical in the sense it has a curve to the blade this way and this way. And so it makes a nice concave cut, which works out well on elms. So I've eliminated this other potential trunk section in favor of this one, committing to the front being somewhere in this area. And the other thing that I need to do is take off this. I think I'm going to use this as the top, or the beginning of the top. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this back slightly. All right, with that done, I'm on to wiring, and there's not a whole lot left, but these intermediate steps are really important in terms of creating a quality composition. So I know this plant is really vigorous. You can see that based on the shoots. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wire these vigorous shoots, and then I'm going to set this aside. The wire is only gonna be on there for probably a few weeks, maybe a month. One of the things that you have to be really careful of at this stage when you're wiring tender young growth in early spring is that you don't knock off the shoot. So unlike later in the year when things have had a little bit more time to grow and harden off, at this time of year, these shoots are going to be very, very tender. It's sort of like a piece of celery rather than a piece of wood. And it's very easy for you to just snap it off at the base. I've actually left this smaller shoot just in case that happens here, and I've got a couple of backups in case I do it up there as well. If you do it, it's not really that big of a deal because you're probably gonna get another shoot right there anyway, but it's a step backwards in the sense that you will have to wait another month or 2 months or something like that or longer to generate that new growth. All right, so what I've done here on this section is to just sort of wire out the branch and lay it out. I've left a little vertical section here at the base of the branch because I'm trying not to bend the base of the branch. And in an elm, upward and outward sort of arching look is really nice rather than something that's laying flat down and then coming back up more like a pine tree. And as I'm bending these, I'm twisting the branch while I bend it. Inverting the orientation of the foliage is not really a big deal on these guys. If it were the hot middle of summer, then I might be a little bit concerned about leaf burn on the bottom getting hit by hot sun. But at the moment, it's pretty mild conditions, and so it's not too much concern. So as I look at this now, having bent this branch down, I am realizing that this branch doesn't need to be nearly as big as this one. The directionality is going to be this way. So I'm going to cut this short and start treating it more like a ramification project so that I can start getting more division while I get the branching going in this section above it. So as I'm bending this, I am watching the base of the shoot. Like I said, they're really easy to knock off at this stage, at this time of year, this type of growth. And so I'm kind of holding the wire at the base of the shoot. If your wiring technique is good, that means that it shouldn't really move anyway, but it's better to not take a chance. The other thing I want to mention is that I have wired this shoot to I've wired this shoot to this shoot and this shoot to this shoot. In other words, I didn't pick the two shoots that are closer to each other. I didn't wire these two together and I didn't wire these two together. That gives you a better anchor than the other way around, and that's because you have an extra sort of half turn or full turn around the larger piece of wood to keep your wire steady. So because this tree already has reasonably good taper built into it, I am going straight into thinking about creating the crown, and I don't want to add a lot more height. It's already going to be above Shohin size, but I don't need to add another trunk section. In some other projects and some other, early and middle development projects, I would definitely be doing that, but I'm actually kind of moving ahead here. I don't need to build more trunk, and so just laying these out, which will stimulate more buds to come from the base of these upward facing leaves. So on elm trees, the tree will bud at any leaf, and that means that when I bend these over, the hormonal inhibition from the tip, so the tip is creating a hormone, but that hormone will only flow downhill. So if I've moved the tip down, that means that the hormone that's inhibiting the buds at the base of the shoot no longer hits that area, and those will start to grow. So now that I've done the rough branch placement, I have to kind of pick what do I think my actual front is going to be. And I think I already picked it when I was potting this tree down from the growing container into this training container. And it's this, you can barely see it, but there's like a little arched hole there. From that angle, I can see this root really nicely. I can see the rock, and I can also see this. But what I need to do right now is just make sure that the branch placements, these rough branch placements, which are pretty important at this stage because I won't be able to move them later. I would have to cut them off and start over again. And so let me just look really carefully here. Yeah, so if I turn this and look at it, both this branch and this branch need to rotate that way in order for that to be the good front. You want the key branch, this lower branch that is kind of like the most dramatic descending branch, to come towards you, and you don't want the second branch here to come forward quite this much. So I'm actually going to bend it back like that, and then I'll work on bringing smaller pieces forward. Much better. All right, there's a little bit of elm middle development for you, and I have a lot more of these to get through. I should mention before I wrap this up that the reason in very early March, so as I'm doing this, it's like March 2nd or something like that, and the reason that there are already 8-inch long shoots on this is that I changed the pot. I did some root work on it and potted it into this from a growing container, and then put it in the greenhouse afterwards, both to protect it from cold temperatures outside and also just to stimulate the plant to start growing immediately after that repot. And it was in the greenhouse for about a month, and that's what has caused this vigorous growth. If you live in a colder climate and you're growing your trees outside, I would expect you to see this growth more in mid-April, mid-April or May, and you can perform this operation at that time. All right guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. We'll see you next time.